Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Junkies Podcast. My name is Matthew Ward, and I'm on the Startup Junkie team. This week, I have with me the usual guys, Jeff Amerine and Caleb Talley. How are y'all doing, guys?
Doing great.
Present and accounted for.
Good. And today we have with us our guest, Zach Washam. He is a U of A alum and past student of Jeff, who worked 3 years as an investment banker and won an innovation award for inventing Wells Fargo's first machine learning algorithm for investment banking. Off that, he built a training company with clients including the Royal Bank of Canada and Bank of Montreal. And recently, he has started publishing writing as short form essays on his website. So Zach, thanks for coming on, and we're really happy to have you here.
I'm excited to be here. It's fun to hang out with y'all, and Jeff Amerine has been an important mentor in my life for several years now. So I'm excited to be doing this with you.
Kind words, much appreciated. But do you want to start with the big update? You told us before we came on you had a big update, yes. Or you want to give us the origin story? What do you want to talk about first?
Well, I guess I can give you the update because it's kind of starting with the end, starting with the action. So today is actually a special day because I am signing a 60% sale of Machine Learning Edge. So since I was your student at University of Arkansas, kind of went out and did my thing, and I'll tell that story in a second. But yeah, it's awesome. I have a buyer who he's a friend of mine who has hit a home run on Bitcoin. So he has a large amount of crypto assets that he's trying to deploy, and he wants to get into machine learning. So he likes what I'm doing and has kind of big dreams for the company. And it's awesome because I'm getting to cash out. It's going to give me some cash stability for like the next couple of years, but I still get to retain a 40% stake and participate in the upside while capping my work at 15 hours a week so that I can continue to work on other stuff.
That's a pretty good update. Congratulations. Yeah. Well done. Well done.
We've been talking about a deal for a while, and it's finally
that's great.
Finished negotiating legal docs, and I put my signature on the page just right before I hopped on here.
Well, reel it all the way back to we had a good time in class. You took both semesters back when I was teaching the honors track for new ventures and also venture finance, and then you went, despite my ability to try to dissuade you, you went to Wells Fargo and became an investment banker. So kind of pick it up there and tell us.
I was bootstrapping. Had to raise some capital.
Understood.
So in your class, I did my honors thesis as PubHub was our business idea.
Yeah.
Basically like point of sale technology that we wanted to pitch to bars. And from there, graduated, went and did investment banking at Wells Fargo. And I wanted to stand out, and I wanted to get a big bonus because your bonus as an investment banker is like 50% of your compensation. So if you can get ranked slightly higher, it can have a pretty big impact on your income. So I wanted to get ranked as highly as possible. I wanted to get noticed and impress my boss, and you can actually get promoted more quickly on their platform. It's called A to A. Analyst is like the lowest level, and associate is the next higher up level. And you're doubling your income whenever you make that leap. So if you can do that 1 year early, especially if you're looking at kind of like the net present value of your future cash flows that you can make from those earnings, it's pretty significant when you're thinking about doubling your income 1 year earlier and being able to reinvest that capital. So I really wanted to do that. And I'm looking at different ways that I can provide value that put me in another league from everybody else that I'm competing with. And, they're focusing on deals and transactions and staying late and FaceTime and trying to be really quick responding to email. And I'm like, I don't want to compete in that arena. I want to do something that's going to blow every other analyst out of the water. And so I work on some different projects. I'm tinkering around. I get on a leadership committee and I'm doing some different things, but it's not distinguishing me in the way that I wanted until I start hearing Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and some of these big Wall Street firms are starting to mess with machine learning in trading, was really where I started to hear about it mostly. I'm like, what is that? So I started looking into machine learning. This is probably 2016, I guess, that I started looking into it. And I hear about Goldman Sachs investing in Kensho. So Kensho at the time was using machine learning software to analyze current events. And the CIA had invested in it. Google is investing in it. Goldman Sachs. So it's like big time companies are recognizing there's value in this type of software. So I started learning about it. I look at Microsoft Azure, and they had some good resources to help me understand what are the components. Like when we're talking about machine learning, what does that really mean? And as I started to understand the components and some of the principles at a deeper level, I start looking at the business that I'm doing at Wells Fargo, investment banking, and recognizing, wow, we can use this technology to do our business better, because essentially what we're doing is we're originating debt products. So we're analyzing the market, and we're helping big clients like a Walmart or a JB Hunt or whoever to raise capital as efficiently as possible, in large quantities, like $1 billion or $10 billion from several different, financing providers, big banks. And I realized you can use machine learning to automate the analysis of the market and provide clients with we're basically reverse engineering the decision-making process of the investors on this deal so that we can anticipate what they're going to do using machine learning. And when we do that, our clients are like, wow, this is amazing. You're doing the benefit was like pretty incremental, but the fact that we can walk into a pitch and say, we're using machine learning, my boss liked that. And all the other bankers on our team really liked having that tool in their toolbox. And so that elevated me how I wanted to be elevated. I was ranked as highly as possible. I got the biggest possible bonus, and I was nominated for that early A to A promotion, which would double my income. But I go and the promotion committee reviews my application. They're talking to all my references, and their feedback was, we talked to all of your references, and they said all that they talk about is Zach Washam and machine learning. They don't say anything about your transaction experience. They just talk about machine learning and all this cool stuff that you're doing. It seems like you're more interested in machine learning and your side gig than you are in your day job. And I said, you're right. They denied my promotion for that reason. The stuff that I created made them millions of dollars. We want to deal with Gilead Pharmaceutical and made multi-million dollar fee because of the technology that produced. They're like, we'll pass on your promotion. So I said, thank you for making this an easy decision. Peace out. I'm going to go start Machine Learning Edge. And so I went and did that. And that's been a whole another adventure.
Yeah, it was a great exit though. You didn't fit into their box, and so it was time to go. And you made several moves, right? Part of the time you were living in New York, part of the time you ended up down in Austin, right? At one point.
Yep. I didn't go full digital nomad. I realized pretty quickly that is like really not my lifestyle. I really like to have consistency, and I like to have community and be around people that I like. But as I was building the products, I lived with my parents for a little bit to save money. And then I moved up to Manhattan for a little bit until I realized that it's way too noisy to record digital content. It was a terrible idea. And so I came back down to Texas pretty quickly, produced my products, realized that I didn't know what distribution systems were. And so I got to learn that lesson, and ended up making a profit by the skin of my teeth right as I was running out of cash. And then about a year ago, I guess it was like January last year, I moved down to Austin, put Machine Learning Edge kind of on autopilot with my partner selling most of my stuff. And since COVID hit, essentially, I've been working on my own products or my own projects and exploring things that I've been interested in, and just kind of like riding on the passive income of Machine Learning Edge.
So you're living the 4-hour work week, only it's probably still more like 74 hours. It's just like on stuff you want to spend your time on, right?
It's like the 1-hour work month. I send an invoice to now, and I sold a perpetual license to one of my 3 distribution partners. So I send 2 invoices a month. I'm going today, April 1st, I'm going to have to send 2 invoices. So this is my hardest work day of the month.
So tell us a little bit about.
I'm too close to. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Caleb. I'm too close to the story. So you go ahead and ask the hard questions.
No, I was just going to, Zach, get you to highlight some of that, what you are doing that you are passionate about. You talked about, kind of having the opportunity to really focus more on what you're most interested in. And I'd like to hear more about that.
The kind of stuff I'm working on now?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I think something that I've realized is that like entrepreneurship is much more than a financial decision. And Jeff, I'm like, this is something that you're very familiar with. I didn't know really what this meant when I was deciding to leave Wells Fargo, because I had one of my mentors there. I called him my work dad. His name was Mike, awesome banker, best at what he did in the whole entire world. He's just phenomenal. Super smart guy. What's the Army Academy? West Point? He graduated from West Point, did all that, became just badass. But as I was deciding what am I going to do, he drew me this graph and he's like, this is what it's like to be a banker. You work and then your income increases over time. He's like, this is what it's like to be an entrepreneur. It's like, maybe it goes up like this, but then maybe it goes down like that. So it's like more risk, more reward. So if that's the decision that you want to make, then you can make it. Maybe you'll hit a home run or maybe you'll strike out. What I realized since then is that it doesn't really matter. I mean, like, you do hit home runs and you do strike out. And in the process, you learn about life in a way that, I mean, I never would have if I had stayed in the investment banking bubble, because you're just directly interfacing with the real world. And you don't have the intermediary of your company to protect you from the chaos and to make decisions and to construct your values. And as a result of that, I kind of had to dig into, like, why am I doing the stuff that I'm doing and what am I about? And as Machine Learning Edge kind of got on autopilot, I really had a chance to step back and say, now, like, I don't have to make money for my company. I don't have to make any more products. I don't have to make any more sales. So I'm not motivated. Like, I don't have to be my own fan. I can critique the work that I've done. And I start to ask myself, like, why am I doing any of this in the first place? What is this all about? And I mean, asking some like existential questions, like kind of my quarter life crisis, I guess, because now that I wasn't required to do anything for financial reasons. What am I going to do? Why would I do stuff? What am I here for? And I got into Jordan Peterson, and Maps of Meaning was excellent. I still haven't finished it. I've read like 20% of the book because it's so dense. I'll read one sentence and I'll write about it for an hour or two. But it's a great book. Carl Jung is a psychologist that I got into. I started reading Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is his biography, and started having crazy dreams. And as I was getting into psychology, also like reading some surveys of philosophy, kind of like the history of thought over time and how different brilliant people have approached these existential questions without finding an answer. And so eventually I'm like, well, if they can't figure it out, then I probably won't be the guy. If like the Hobbes and Nietzsche and whoever haven't answered the mystery of life, then I'm probably not going to be the one. And so now what I do, and that's kind of where I'm at, is the things that I'm exploring on my site are like how, as a human here, who knows why, like who's showed up, and my parents just showed up here and I just showed up here and we're all trying to figure out what's going on. What do we do with that? And how do we orient ourselves when there's so many different options of what to believe and so many different competing claims of truth, motivated claims of truth, by Machine Learning Edge, you need to learn this. It's the future of finance. And I really want you to believe that, because if you do, you'll give me $250. So it's kind of like, how do you parse out the truth and do the right thing? That's what I'm exploring right now.
But you're also doing some speaking as part of that. And I mean, you're having conversations and almost like TED Talk type of activity where you're talking to people about your journey and the ways to think about things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a motivational speaker that I volunteered with, and I was helping him with some of his events, and started doing some events of my own, like you said, down in Austin with a couple of friends, speaking about different kinds of stuff. So like business to romantic relationships to achieving your goals. And it was super fun and felt like I was able to deliver value to people. But I think the deeper that I go into this, the more that I feel kind of arrogant doing that. Which is something that I don't want to do. And that's kind of why I've transitioned more into the essay format, where, and I think you probably could present this kind of stuff in a workshop format, but it'd probably be more open-ended. But in my essays, I just take like smaller ideas, things that I really feel like I can capture and present it in a way that I think is a little bit more humble than the approach I was taking in my workshops. That was a little bit more declarative. And that's what feels right to me right now.
That's cool. At the moment, go ahead, Caleb.
I was just gonna say I could see where, you know, like a webinar or a event style format, it's more kind of like presenting these ideas as an authority on that topic versus like presenting an idea in a written format to where it's like, let's digest and, you know, here, analyze this with me, that sort of thing. Because I could definitely see where
yeah, and I like that.
differentiate
And I
those
think
two.
if I were to do a live workshop or a webinar or something, I would probably take that tact as well. It feels more honest.
So Zach, I talked about this in an earlier podcast, and now I'm actually going to pull it out. This is one that, can you see it?
The Grand Biocentric Design.
Yeah. So this is written by a guy named Robert Lanza, who is an MD. He's one of the 50 big thinkers, supposedly, and another guy who is a quantum physicist.
Mm-hmm.
And what the main premise of the book is how life creates reality. So he gets into the physics behind how consciousness determines reality, and then backs it up with the quantum physics and talks about without an observer, which is all of us and anything that's living, all the rest of this stuff is just a random series of possibilities. So it gets into concepts of, well, what do we learn from quantum entanglement? The fact that you can have two particles separated by light years that will react exactly the same way. And they don't know why, but there's some sort of an entanglement there that's been proven over and over. So anyway, this guy's whole point is biology is the master of all of it. There's one consciousness and we're all connected and everything interacts. And the universe is only here because we're here. So anyway, that's the basic premise. And there's about 400 pages, more than that. But I've given you the sort of redneck version of it. But you got to read this guy. He's written 3 books that are related. The Grand Biocentric Design. So given the journey you're on, this would be one that would be apropos, I think, for what you're pursuing.
It sounds right in line with a lot of the questions that I'm asking. An interesting thought I mentioned with Caleb and Matt is this idea of divergence and convergence, and it relates to the way that you just described that book. So imagine that divergence is, well, convergence, imagine as a seed. And you take that seed and you plant it in the earth. Now the seed is convergence. The ground is divergence. The seed is orderly, the ground is chaotic. The ground it's living things, it's dead plants, it's dead biomatter, it's ground up rocks, all these things decayed, broken into tiny little bits. It's as chaotic of a substance as you can find. It's perfectly chaotic. It's all mixed up. You put this seed in there, it has everything that it needs for life, including DNA, the instructions. Now the seed begins to diverge into the soil, right? It sends out these roots. And as you look, the seed, as it diverges, it begins to look a little bit more chaotic. It has these things branching out, right? But as it's doing that, it's taking the chaos, the nutrients in the dirt, it's finding the parts that it needs, it's soaking it up, it's bringing it back into the plant, and it's putting it in order in the form of a stem that pokes up, little leaves, and becomes a trunk and branches and fruit, right? So by diverging into the chaos, it's able to soak these things up, put them in order, and construct life. And at a certain point, it becomes difficult to say what's divergence and what's convergence, because it's branching out, that's divergence, but then it's producing a fruit, which is very convergent. And at the center of that is a seed, which is ultimately convergent. You plant it in the earth and start all over again. And I think it's interesting that, like, this seems to be, if life is fractal, you know, it's these patterns that tend to repeat at multiple levels of scale and multiple levels of hierarchy, then divergence and convergence is sort of the one of the fundamental functions of that lets it happen. And Jordan Peterson talks about order and chaos as being kind of the fundamental elements of of reality. And if you think, if order and chaos are the fundamental elements, then divergence and convergence are the fundamental actions. It's the transformation of one into the other. Order diverges like the seed. Order diverges into chaos. Chaos converges into order, the nutrients becoming the plant. And relating to the grand biocentric design, this is what I think is interesting. I think you said biology creates reality, right? That's the idea?
It's consciousness and the presence of the observer is what defines everything else. Were it not for the observer, all this stuff would be a series of random possibilities. And what they're doing is they're applying some of the fundamentals of quantum mechanics to how the universe works in general. And quantum mechanics are most definitely influenced by the presence of the observer.
Right, this is the particle shifting into the wave and vice versa.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
And basically what it's saying is the soil doesn't become the tree without you could call it the consciousness of the DNA, like the intelligence of the DNA in the seed that turns it into the plant. But I think what's interesting is that if, Murphy's Law says anything that can happen will happen. And that's the force of chaos, right? And it's energy, it's energetic. Anything that can happen will happen. It's going to mix it up. We're going to have to respond. We're going to have to adapt, but that produces motion. But the force of convergence, and that's divergence. It's a chaotic force of divergence. Convergence says, yes, anything that can happen will happen, but only that which converges survives. Everything else dies. And this is the force of evolution, which is the force of biology. So you've got certain patterns which make it in this reality. Patterns such as like a tree or a lizard or a mushroom or a human being. It's like we're this thing that keeps happening over and over. And we somehow adapted to make it work. But there are, two-headed turtles that are expressions of Murphy's Law. Anything that can happen will happen. There will be a two-headed turtle. But guess what? It doesn't fit a stable pattern. So it dies and it doesn't persist. If that were a stable pattern, we'd have more two-headed turtles. We'd have 3 and 10-headed turtles, but we don't. And I think that is very interesting, because why is it that certain patterns persist and others don't? And it comes back to business. Why is it that businesses tend to take similar form? We have these things called business models, and they're similar. And you can create a business that takes any form, but that doesn't mean it's going to live.
Yeah, there tends to be a natural order that's going to gravitate towards survival versus failure.
Yeah. So it's like it is consciousness that creates it, right? And like our decisions make it, but if we make bad decisions, it won't last. So there's something else too.
There's something else to that. The other thing that's really kind of freaky to talk about, which is mind-numbing, is that we always think of time as a constant, but the idea of time is only relevant to living things that have the ability to remember. So in physics, they view time and space to be not constants. They are variables. And there's a lot of discussion about the past, present, and future all kind of happening simultaneously from a cosmic standpoint. So anyway, how some of that is relevant to startups, I'm not sure, but it's definitely interesting shit.
I think it totally is. And here's why. Is because if life is a stable pattern, life is something that persists. It's a healthy frog, like a one-headed frog that produces new one-headed frogs persistently in perpetuity. Then I think of it like a shape. Like I think of time as if it was a shape. You have a two-dimensional square, right? But then you stretch it out and it becomes a cube. So I think of like, okay, here's like a single frog. Now you stretch it out over generations of frogs. Like that's kind of a persistent shape and how it adapts to things over time. And so I see what you mean. That makes sense.
I was going to bring up the fact, when we talked originally, you kind of applied, the divergent convergent methodology or thought process on, I guess, kind of the creative thinking or just like thought patterns. So I'd be interested in applying, kind of talking about that too.
Yeah. So these words came into my vocabulary taking a course by a writer named David Perell. And he's a really fabulous writer, and he has a great article on Peter Thiel that I think is worth checking out, that led me to discovering René Girard, who's an awesome philosopher. Both, it's a nice little rabbit hole to go down if you or anybody listening to this has the time. But he talks about how, as you're writing an essay, you start with like a hook. So the one essay that I have published on my site right now is about the connection between home and identity. And it happened because I'm making my website as a part of this course that I'm taking. I know I want to start writing and doing this thing. And I put the phrase, welcome to my online home. And I put up a picture and I write a little description of who I am for people that are coming. And then I look at it, I'm like, this doesn't feel right. This stuff doesn't feel like it belongs in my online home. But then I'm like, what is my online home and why does this even matter? So I end up spending like an hour or two thinking about how am I going to write these 2 paragraphs on my website, you know? And at the end of it, I've got my 2 paragraphs. Nobody would ever know the huge amount of time that I spent thinking about who am I and all this stuff to put that up there. But by the time I was done, I was like, this belongs in my online home. It feels good. So then I have this hook. I'm like, somehow creating a home is related to who I am and me knowing who I am. And my inability to create an online home came from a disconnect, like something that I didn't know about myself. And through constructing my home, I get to know myself better. So that's this tiny little seed. Then I start to explore that and ask more questions. I've got these kind of like this whiteboard back here. I've got these big pieces of paper and I'm drawing all over them. I'm putting sticky notes everywhere and it's a big mess, but I'm exploring and I'm learning. It's kind of like sending out the roots, right? In all of these different directions. But at a certain point, I can't publish my whiteboard. I can't publish all my notes and these messy things that I've put together. I have to turn around at a certain point and put things in order. And so there's a moment where I put away my whiteboard, I put away my big pieces of paper, and I sit down at a computer and I say, okay, what have I found? How can I put this into the most logical order possible? Like I'm writing a scientific abstract. And that's when I turn the corner from divergent thought into convergent writing. I'm not exploring anymore. I'm trying to produce a fruit from the things that I've found. And at the ultimate level, that becomes a really nice piece of work like Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning. For 18 years, he goes through this process of diverging into different thought, converging into like a smaller piece of work, like a talk or an essay or a class that he's giving. And then Maps of Meaning it's all of that compressed into one gem, you know? And that's why I've only read 20% of it. I read like one sentence and I'm like, oh my God, I have to impact this for like the rest of the day. It's so dense. It's so good. So that's kind of the process, is like diverging into all these different things, converging it into something that's useful.
I'm looking for a parallel into entrepreneurship. I guess that convergence onto a fruit could be the lean canvas. So you're diverging all these ideas.
100%.
No, I mean, it is, right? It is. And that's one of the things that I don't think people fully appreciate about the startup process, the creative process is, and that's part of the reason why our symbol is the S, which is the symbol for entropy, which is the belief that order is going to tend towards chaos. And our role has always been to not stifle the creativity. Chaos is an important part of the creative process, but to lightly guide it in a way that it can result in something good. So this idea of entropy or chaos is very much part of the startup process. You start with all the possibilities in the world. Guy Kawasaki would describe it as that brand new perfect sheet of ice after the Zamboni does all the cleaning. He talks about this in The Art of the Start. We used to talk about that in class, and it's perfectly clean and there's no cut marks on it and nobody skated on it and it's perfect. It's brand new. All the possibilities are there in the beginning. And then a lean canvas or any kind of good creative process begins to pull the nuggets out, the key learnings that are going to put a framework around something that's meaningful that you can pull out of the chaos. You know, and I think there's some fundamentals in the universe that are that way, right? If the observer has to be there in order to bring meaning, the consciousness, the observer plays a central role in defining the reality that we all perceive. That's it. And in a business model, there's all the possibilities in the world, and through a good process of being open-minded in terms of how you ask questions and observing what will be meaningful to the folks you're trying to serve, you come up with an order, a convergent view of what will deliver value. And it's not static, right? It's a dynamic thing that can change because perceptions and preferences and all that are changing dynamically as well. So it's I think some of this people would say, well, man, I mean, it's ethereal or it's really esoteric or it's really deep. It's fundamental. And I think
it's very practical.
It's practical because it allows you to understand ultimately on a postmortem basis why some things have failed. And I think on a postmortem basis, it'll tell you why certain things work, because there was a natural order to what they did. They didn't violate some fundamental laws that we don't all understand, you know?
Yeah. And you know, the way that one of the things I've been asking myself as I've explored this idea is how can I make, like, how is this practical? What does it mean for me? How do I use this? And in the past, I've been a very extreme person. You know, like when I was at school, I was like all about school, and I'm in my fraternity. I'm all about my fraternity. I go into banking and I'm doing it 100 hours a week. And then and what I've realized through this divergent, convergent thought process is it aligns with the seasons. Spring is the beginning of convergence. Summer is full, divergence, sorry. Summer is full divergence. And bordering on chaotic, everything is overgrown. Fall is where things start to converge into fruit. And then winter is harsh convergence. And if you think of like, have you all seen Game of Thrones? Are you Game of Thrones fans?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the Starks are in the north. And there's one conversation that Cersei and Joffrey Lannister have down in the south. And Joffrey says, I'm going to go take over the north. I'm going to kill the Starks and we're going to rule the north. And his mom, Cersei, says, nobody can rule the north. Only the Starks can rule the north. And why is that? It's because the Starks have a certain level of discipline with which they operate the north. And what are the Starks' words?
Winter's coming.
Winter's coming. It's their motto. Yeah. So what they're always, even in the middle of the summer, they're reminding themselves, they're reminding the kids that this will eventually converge, and convergence is harsh. And if you don't converge, you'll die. And because they remember that, they can live in the harshest environment because they always remember this. We're going to have to converge. We've got to be smart. We've got to basically fix the roof while the sun shines.
Before the White Walkers come over the wall, yep. Right?
and so the meaning of that in business is there is a time to diverge and be creative and explore, do customer development, to experiment. And during that time, you want to be focused on fast fail, right? I want to have a bunch of ideas. I'll put out a bunch of little roots and give all of them a chance to find something useful, right? And I don't want to limit that or stifle it because then the thing will die. It'll never put out enough roots to produce anything. But as you do that, you start to find some things are more productive than others. Some directions are more fruitful than others. And over the lifespan of a company, there are seasons when you do that, but there are seasons when you focus on what's working. And if you don't ever converge on the thing that's working, if you never actually have a product, if you never focus on a specific customer and you're trying to do everything for everybody, or you're just constantly experimenting because you're Peter Pan and you don't want to grow up, then you're going to die. You're not going to have a successful company.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, Zach, that you say that because when you look at the way entrepreneurs or wantrepreneurs approach the process, there are those that are in love with the lifestyle that just fall too in love with the constantly chasing shiny objects and experimenting and never get to the point of convergence where they're actually building something meaningful. And sometimes it's attention span. Sometimes it's just, I think there's this sort of romantic view of the lifestyle, which is not necessarily healthy. I mean, you could go to every venture ecosystem around the country and interview the people that are doing things, and they could give you a list of 10 names of people that are always around, always working on something new and never actually accomplish anything. And I think it's fundamental to what you said in that if you don't get to that point where you're converging around something meaningful that delivers real value, it'll be constant experiments that will never amount to anything.
And it happens not only in startups, it does happen in startups, but not only does it happen in startups, but it happens in a human life. Is you have people who are 30 years old or 40 years old, and you've got this immature man-child who never decided who he is, doesn't have a career, and doesn't have anything valuable to offer to the world because he didn't want to grow up. And that's literally what the story of Peter Pan is about. Is you've got this kid who, what does he want to do? He wants to go on adventures. He wants to have fun. And so what's the motto of Peter Pan and the Lost Boys?
Never grow up, right?
I don't ever want to grow up. And they live in Neverland. Yep. And the bad guys are adults. They're these cranky old men, and they're fighting them to go on adventures. It's super fun, but it's a fantasy. And then the other one is you have the story of Aladdin. And this is a different kind of problem that I think is also relevant for entrepreneurs, because while Peter Pan resists limitation, and because he resists limitation, he resists definition, because those are the same thing. You know, to become anything, you have to not be everything else. And so he resists definition, he resists limitation, lives in Neverland. Aladdin is very aware of his limitation. He knows exactly who he is. I'm a poor pauper here in the city, and I'm in love with the princess, and I'm not good enough for her. And so what does he do? He constructs this facade. I'm going to be Prince Ali. I'm going to lie about who I am. I'm not going to be unlimited like Peter Pan. I'm going to create something that's false that I think is good enough.
Yeah. And that's Elizabeth Holmes.
Exactly. Exactly.
100%. I mean, I'm not saying that. That is a mythology that's been perpetuated in Silicon Valley about fake it before you make it. That is exactly the wrong way to do it. That will work in some cases, but not very often. And it didn't work for her. It's
dangerous. I mean, the idea of there's this kind of thought of like imposter syndrome, and that it's, you know, you should ignore it, but like, maybe you shouldn't. Maybe you should be humble. And like, because the alternative would be, okay, like I want to be an investment banker, but I'm coming from University of Arkansas, and University of Arkansas doesn't produce a lot of top tier Wall Street investment bankers. So what do? I make 200 phone calls to every person that I can friend on LinkedIn. And I say, hey, I want to do this. Will you tell me how to do it? And I get on, and like 2 of them look at my resume and say, your resume is dog shit, and here's why. And one of them is like, okay, now that you've improved your resume, we can get on the phone and do a practice interview. So then I go through the recruiting process for an internship, which is basically necessary to get a full-time job. They almost exclusively hire from their intern class. I get cut at the internship. So then my internship, I go to ConocoPhillips, and then I go to the business development guy there, the VP of business development. And I say, hey, I want to help you out with these investment banking deals that you're doing. You know, you're working with these people to sell, you know, oil and gas assets for ConocoPhillips. I want to come help you with that on top of my job. So I say, here's my job. I'm just doing back office finance stuff. Let me come volunteer with you for free and be helpful to you. He's like, okay, cool. So then I go and I do that. And then when I go back for the full-time interview with Wells Fargo, I can say, this is what I did at ConocoPhillips. And I did. It's not what they hired me to do, but I did it for free. And so they let me in the door. And so then you can talk about, okay, this is my real limitation, but through humility, I begin to grow it. Through humility and through patience, I begin to grow so that I actually have something. I don't have to be Prince Ali.
Great story. Great analogy. Very good.
I think it's the same thing. It's the same thing with the business.
I know Matthew's been itching to ask a question because he's getting ready to go to Stevens. So he's about ready to go on the path that you were on. So fire away, Matthew.
So at first I was like, I'm not sure if I want to ask the question because this is really good stuff to listen to and really absorb. And even through the first contact we had with each other, I knew that you were a unique and different type of guy that I don't get to see every day. So one question that I did have for you, though, is with the stage that you're in now, what do you see as being successful? Because it seems like with all the searching you're doing right now, can you really define success, or is that more of a fluid, dynamic thing that changes over time?
I think right now I define being successful as being honest and learning. Because I think where I've landed is we live in an interesting time where the existence of some kind of like objective truth is in question, like philosophically and also popularly. It leaks into popular culture. So like, for example, the motivational speaker that I was working with, that I was volunteering with after Machine Learning Edge was Tony Robbins. One of the things that he teaches is that beliefs are a tool that you can use to accomplish things. So if I want to start if I want to make $1 billion company, what does somebody who creates $1 billion company believe? And if I can believe the things that they believe, or what would I need to believe to do that? You know, if I can believe the things I need to believe, then I can accomplish it. And a part of that is true. You know, there's something about this that is actually effective, but at the root of it, what's the statement that you're making about the fabric of our reality is like, if you can change, if my beliefs are a tool to accomplish something, then what's the basis for my target? Because isn't my target something that I choose based on my beliefs? I say, this is what I believe is going on here. And so therefore what I should do is build $1 billion company. And in order to do that, I'm going to believe what I need to believe to build $1 billion company. It becomes this recursive logic. and you don't have a foundation. And this is why we have this argument publicly about, like everything is just socially constructed. It's only a function of power dynamics. And as long as you're stuck in this recursive logic, then there's no argument against that. And so, yeah, I think that can be so confusing and harmful that I think real success is remembering that there is such a thing as truth, and we can understand pieces of it if we're humble and if we're honest, and through that we can learn and move closer to doing the right thing. So that's success to me. Well,
and to your point, Zach, I mean, some of that is very Machiavellian that you describe. So so there's a belief that the ends will justify the means, and that's almost never true, right? That's almost never true. It's the how you proceed on the journey is just as important as where you end up. And I guess what I'm saying is you boil it all back to the idea of it's good to start off with a foundation of principles, what matters to me and what is truth, versus this is some target that I want to get to. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think if you start off with that fundamental understanding of what you believe, not what you believe in terms of I'm going to emulate someone else's beliefs to achieve a target, but what you believe. I think that's the starting point. Because I have to tell you, good examples, and I may have even talked about this in class, are Troy Aikman after he won the second Super Bowl. He was as hugely successful as you could be at the time that he played. He said after he won the second one, what did it all mean? Is this all there is? Because that destination that he was aiming for his entire life, probably from the time he played Pop Warner football, was hollow. There wasn't more to it. And so, and I've seen that in deal guy. You probably saw that a lot in the investment banking community. It's always about what's the next bonus, what's the next deal, what's the next income level. And at the end of that process, it's a unidimensional life. And those are some of the most unhappy people I've ever run across. Two of my early business partners in the 90s, one came from petrochemical space, and another was a senior lawyer at a large firm who had been very close to political administration. He'd been the fundraising guy in the 90s for a prominent politician I won't name. But these were the most unhappy people I had ever been around, and they were all about the next deal. They didn't care who they squashed along the way. It was all about optimizing their pool of chips at the expense of everything else. Another good read on that, just to put a plug in for Adam Grant, is the book called Give and Take. He gets into the philosophy of how people interact and this idea of doing things to the benefit of others without being consumed by reciprocity or what's in it for you. And he does it because he's a Wharton business professor with empirical evidence to say, here are the case studies. This shows how much better in the long run the people that had the give attitude performed than those that were either matchers looking for reciprocity. I'll do this for you if you do that for me, or those people that were constantly optimizing their own position, the takers. And so, I mean, I think a lot of what you're exploring there, and maybe what you learned some of through the motivational speaking, is you got to start out from a genuine interest and a set of values that define who you are before you can set a good target that means anything. Another way to put it, and it's kind of trite, is a lot of us, after we get through a career, are trying to figure out how to go from success to significance. If you can have that mindset earlier in your career, you don't waste as much time as I did. I mean, it was always about the next hurdle, the next startup, the next fundraise for a long, long time, really, until I got engaged with Startup Junkie 13 years ago. That was the first time when I felt like I can see a direct correlation between what we do and the impact it has on people's lives. And that is wealth, not the money. I'm curious for you, how much of that correlates, do you think, with your ego? I think a lot of it is, it's, you know, when I was younger, I'll personalize it. I think I was very self-absorbed. And some of that comes from a level of insecurity of thinking, maybe I'm not good enough to do this. I'm not good enough to do that. And there's a level of determination that you bring to that, proving your own insecurities wrong and proving your perception of what others think about you as wrong. And so you're constantly propelled to achieve more and more and more to prove the crowd and yourself wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to a point where you're like, screw them. I'm going to do what I like to do, and I'm going to figure out a way to do well by other people, and let's just see how that works out. And once you get past all those insecurities and being self-absorbed, it opens up a whole world of possibilities.
Man, it's so interesting, because that was really a huge motivator for me at Wells Fargo, was the fact that I came from the University of Arkansas and I'm working with people who had these pedigrees, and I wanted to just dominate, because I wanted to show everybody, it's like, I'm just some guy filling a spot, like I'm the best one here. And then whenever I went to do Machine Learning Edge, the most demotivating thing that people said to me was, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go start this company. Everybody's like, oh yeah, like you can do it. I was like, no, I don't have any energy. I need you to tell me that I can't, because I have to prove you wrong, or else I don't care.
Your dog mentality.
Yeah. And that's a real thing.
It is.
But it doesn't lead you in the right direction. I mean, it doesn't lead you to a fulfilling place. And it's basically what my essay that I just published is about, is like finally realizing what I'm actually after is like, I want to build a home in the world. And whether that's like a physical space, but really it's like a career, in the sense of, I want something that I can provide to the world, that I can be really good at, that's valuable, in a place that I want to live for a long time. Because I didn't want to live as an investment banker. And honestly, I didn't even really want to live in Machine Learning Edge. And I think in order to create a home for yourself, you have to disregard what other people say, because that will take you in a different direction. And it's only possible whenever you can calm down your ego that's telling you that you're not good enough and that you can't do it, and worrying about all those things.
You also find there's a direct correlation between how externally motivated people are to do the right thing, maybe an inverse correlation between that factor and how many selfies they've got out on Facebook or Instagram. And for those people that do that all the time, it's a rare day when you're going to see my face on there, but that wasn't always the case. I mean, It was always about, what's the next accolade or the award, but that stuff is so hollow and short-lived. And truthfully, as a leader in an organization, that's only happening because of the good work your people do anyway. So
it's kind of a lie.
It is. The self-absorption that people have is the most destructive. Narcissism is the most destructive of all the deadly traits that you can have. Once you get past that, I think it opens up a lot of doors, a lot of possibilities. But it's tough, because we're all, everyone wants to have that level of self-worth, but I think ultimately you define your self-worth by seeing the good things that happen to other people that you might have had some small part of. And that's where real wealth ultimately comes from, I think. And I think you're on this path. I'll tell you, Zach, you are on this path about 30 years sooner than I got on it. So good on you.
It's the nice thing about having a good teacher. Acceleration.
Caleb, land the plane. I know we've covered an awful lot of ground here, but ask our one question we ask every time.
Absolutely. So Zach, the one question we do ask everybody that's been on the podcast is kind of, if you had the opportunity to go back in time, have a crystal ball, knowing everything that you know now, when you started this journey, whether it's when you graduated from the university or even further back, what advice would you give yourself?
I would have never studied finance. I think I started school as an architect, and I loved it. And I was exploring things that I thought were interesting. I was doing studies. I spent a lot of time by myself because I loved what I was doing. I didn't need other people to tell me what I was doing was good, because I thought it was beautiful. I was just like living in this place of creating space and texture and form. And it was like the most fulfilling work. And then I gave my final review to a panel of professional architects, and I actually got a pretty good grade in the course. I think I got a B+, but their critiques that took me from like an A+ to a B+ it just like broke my heart, because it was this thing that I loved that was a representation of like who I was, and I was too sensitive because that ego part of me, that fear that I wasn't good enough, I was too sensitive, and it hurt me so badly that when I came into the class the next semester, I walked into the room where I had my final review and I felt sick to my stomach. And I went to my professor and I said, I have to change. And so I think it's taken me 9 years to realize what I'm actually after is like, I want to create a home for myself in this life. And I want to share it with other people, the things that I love. And I have the direction to figure that out. It's just what resonates with me. And all that I need to do is just not worry about proving other people wrong or, accolades or achievements. And I can just get to work and do it.
That's an awesome way to end. Have you got some public facing stuff that you're willing to share at this point? If people want to get a hold of you or want to have a conversation, or are you still kind of in stealth mode right now?
I'm public work in progress mode. My website is rough. It's rough, but you can go to zachwasham.com, ZACHWASHAM.com. I've got a little email list. I don't send out anything regularly, but I'll shoot people a notification whenever I publish new essays. And my email address is on the site too, if people want to send me a message. But yeah, that's basically it right now. Just constructing and exploring.
Hey, congrats on the journey, and keep us posted. It's always fun to check in to see where you are in the process.
Will do. And Jeff, I hope you know that I'm not blowing smoke when I say this. You have been a critical part of the whole process. It would not have happened if you weren't there teaching me the things that you taught me. If you hadn't taught me about the lean startup, like that's how I built Machine Learning Edge. Is I read the book that you told me to read and I did what it said and it worked. That's it. So, and being able to call you even after, I called you when I was a banker and I was thinking about it. I called you in Austin whenever shit hit the fan with COVID and you were giving me good advice. So I really can't overstate how great of a mentor you've been and just kind of what a pleasure it is to have you kind of in my corner.
Well, I always get more than I give. So I appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun watching you go. Good luck in the next steps.
Thank you.
All right.
Talking to you all.
You too. We'll see ya.
Yeah.